Welcome to Guest of the Year. I'm the host. My name's Mike. This week's setlist curator is John Henrikson, aka The Professor. John is the host of the Deadpod, a weekly podcast that features hand-picked sets of Grateful Dead music spanning the band's entire run. The Deadpod is an institution with over 470 episodes of incredible picks and equally fantastic commentary. The link to the Deadpod is in the show notes. Welcome, John.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
All right, here's how the game works. We'll play the first part of a Grateful Dead live track, and each contestant will use the messaging system to silently guess which year the performance is from. Contestants who are all on a video conference together can message in their guesses at any time during the clip or in the 10 seconds after it concludes. Again, we're doing the Tournament of Champions format, so we're going to play 5 songs, and whoever is the least number of years off over the 5 songs continues on to face Steve and one other winner, the winner of Heat 3, in the finals. All right, without further ado, the Grateful Dead. The guesses are in. That was a Dark Star at the Cleveland Public Auditorium on December 6th, 1973. John, what a cool pick. Tell us about it.
Well, it was actually my first Grateful Dead show that I attended. And what a show it was. I mean, not only did you have what was basically the longest Dark Star ever, it did have the longest Here Comes Sunshine ever. Public Hall in Cleveland was a great place to see a show. We lost one of my compatriots. Couldn't find him for about a half hour after the show. It was no surprise after that, but really got me on the bus for sure.
It's rare that we have people on who went to a 73 show. How would you compare seeing the band live in 73 versus 77?
It was a whole different kind of scene. It was much less structured and professional back then. I mean, if you wanted to wander up front and look Jerry in the eye, you could do that really easily. It wasn't hard. I was not an expert by any means back then. I didn't know all the songs, but nevertheless, the music affects you in a way that, as you know how it does. So.
And not everyone knew all the songs, maybe?
Yeah, I don't think everybody knew all the songs. There wasn't quite as much an entourage following the band around, at least at that show and the few shows I saw during that period of time. There were some, but not the hardcore tour heads that you saw later.
Thanks, John. Well, all these guys guess 74.
It's close to 74. It's December, right?
Just about as close as it gets, yeah. Gavin won 3 times. He's back with us. He is 47 from Las Vegas by way of Chicago. Gavin, why 74?
Keith, specifically, the keyboard sounded like some 74 shows that I heard, specifically the International Amphitheater show in Chicago. It kind of had that sort of vibe to it. And I knew it was a Dark Star, and I knew it was, half an hour long, probably. I was able to narrow it down. I didn't think it was 73, because when I think of 73 in the late 73, I don't remember that keyboard necessarily sounding quite like that, but maybe I just haven't listened to enough of it, perhaps. But that's, that's where I nailed it down to.
How quickly did you know it was a Dark Star, and what kind of gave it away? Is there anything in particular?
Whenever a jam of a song doesn't ring a bell with me for the first, 30, 40 seconds, I then just automatically default to it being a Dark Star from that era. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, I'd be right. That's where my thinking was on that.
Cool. Gunnar's back with us. He is 59 from Roy, Utah. You also guessed 74. What were you thinking, Gunnar?
Well, Keith was really the person that made me think 74 because I don't really recall hearing many 73 shows where Keith is playing electric. So that led me to 74. Plus it just had kind of a wall of sound vibe to me. And I knew it was Dark Star, and I think Jerry kind of tipped it off for me.
Thank you. Edward's back with us. He's 19 from San Antonio. Did the keys give it away? Why did you guess 74?
Like everyone's been saying, it's the Fender Rhodes sound that Keith had, right? Like it's not necessarily something that would tip you off about 73 because it's a big, 74 thing. Like I'm thinking, for example, like the Winterland run, right? Pre-hiatus. It's all Fender Rhodes. And even Bobby's guitar tone, I preached that a ton last couple of times I was on this. And it just sounded very 74 to me. But like even in my mind, I was thinking, man, this is either December 73 or like February 74. And I went with my gut and my gut failed me.
I appreciate you telling when your gut failed you because everyone talks about when their gut worked. And Brett won 4 times. He's 29 from Holland, Pennsylvania. He's back with us. Why 74?
I didn't necessarily hear Dark Star, but yeah, it had that classic 74 sound to me.
Sure. Well, everyone's 1 year off after the first song. So everyone's in the same position going into song number 2. Let's hear it. Born cross-eyed at the Carousel Ballroom in Portland, Oregon on February 14th, 1968. John, tell us about that Primal Dead pick.
It's one of my favorite Primal Dead picks. When I played this back on my podcast back in, I think it was 06, 08. I had one of the bigger responses of any show I'd played. I mean, people were telling me about dancing around in the radio, because a lot more than just that song is great. And that whole set is fabulous. Of course, they released it commercially later. It's always had a place in my heart.
Yeah, so you choose a different set every week, and you've been doing it, again, you have almost 800 episodes. How do you decide what to play each week?
I try not to play commercial releases, which is getting more and more difficult, as you might imagine. I try to generally go by trying to pick something that's at least in the season, if not the month that I'm in. That narrows things down, and then I just go with my heart. I listen to a bunch of stuff and say, well, what would be good here? Sometimes things jump out at you that are worth playing, and then you get lucky. There's no scientific basis to it. I just go for.
So you try to please yourself first and the audience, which ends up working.
Absolutely, yes. And when I first started doing it, I did it more for myself than the audience. So it can probably get that way. If it's not fun, I wouldn't keep doing it, right?
Yeah. So how did the Deadpod start?
It grew out of doing radio. I used to do a community radio show in Columbia, Missouri on KOPN. At first, we did the New Year's Eve shows, live broadcasts. Then we started carrying Gans's Grateful Dead Hour, and then we talked them into letting us do extra hours of Dead after the Grateful Dead Hour. Then we talked them into doing a whole Saturday night show all night long of Grateful Dead because we were basically supporting the community radio station because we had such good listeners. But then I moved to Michigan and I didn't have radio anymore, and I really missed it. So I decided to develop a podcast to take its place. I used to love doing radio. It was a lot of fun. And you'd reach long haul truckers on I-70. They'd be listening to Dark Star in the middle of the night. It was fun. Get calls from the state pen, We used to have this guy from the state penitentiary call us every week. Can you play some of those train songs that Dad play? So, yeah, we'll get one on for you. So things like that made it fun.
So you miss the callers then?
I do kind of miss a live interaction, yes. But I do get interactions from my listeners on Facebook, and I get emails sometimes. Not as many as I'd like, but I shouldn't say that. But yeah, But it's always nice to hear from people who enjoy the show.
Thank you, John. I've always wondered that, so appreciate it. Yeah, it was a 68, and everyone got it except for Gunnar got 67. Gavin, you sent yours in within seconds. What stuck out?
So since I lost, I didn't take it very well. So I wanted to make sure that I studied a little bit more and areas that I was weaker at. I know that song was played one of the similar to like when they played Get Back that one time. Born Cross-Eyed, they only played a few times, and it was in a limited stretch of time.
And that sounded way better than the Get Back.
Yeah, to say the least.
Edward, you were also right on that 68.
Valentine's Day 1968, just a fantastic show. Like Born Cross-Eyed, like Gavin was saying, it was only played in 1968. Like if you know that, it's dead on the money for you. But like this show in particular is just phenomenal. I think it's a Road Trips or something. I recognized the recording, and that got it for me.
Right on, Edward. Brett, you also got it 68.
Yep. And similar reason in terms of what year that song was played. Yeah, it's a great show. I mean, it's probably haven't heard that one in a while because it was one of the earlier ones. I mean, I just from listening to the Dead so much. I mean, especially their live stuff. I knew that was one of their classics, so I listened to that one of the first ones I heard. So usually once I hear a show, I move on to ones that aren't so well known. But yeah, that's a great one.
Right on. And Gunnar, only 1 year off 67. What got you there?
Well, I also knew that Born Cross-Eyed wasn't played a whole lot, but kudos to like Edward. I mean, it just blows my mind that somebody this young blows me away, because I'm not one of these guys that listens to the Grateful Dead all the time. The times that I was listening to the Grateful Dead all the time were back in the times when I was going to shows in the 80s and 90s. I listened to the Grateful Dead all the time then, but I just don't now. I listen to them regularly, but I'm just not as hardcore, guys.
So we have Gunnar is 2. Everyone else has 1. The idea is to be low as possible after 5 songs. Let's hear the third song. So that was a morning due into a playing in the band at Fox Theater in St. Louis on October 18th, 1972. John, killer pick. Super cool. Why do you want to highlight that passage in particular?
Oh, well, this one, it's just that transition. There's very few like it. And I thought it was worth exploring. I really enjoy that passage because There's not a lot like that. It's also one of the first times that they did the split playing was at that show. They did playing, then they came back later and finished it. So,
Given that you saw shows the entire time, basically, what era do you find yourself returning to most? Personally, not for the show.
well, I'm getting old, obviously. So some of the newer shows I go back to, I mean, newer like 90s. I'll listen to a 90s show occasionally or late 80s. But, my favorites are still 73, 74, 72. That's just a peak for me.
All right. Well, everyone got it except Gunnar. Gunnar gets 73, only 1 year off. These guys all got 72. Brett, why 72?
It just had that keys in there, from Keith, and that those were loud and clear. And Bobby had his early 70s sound in there. But just the way that they jammed Morning Dew, I don't think I've ever listened to that show, but Morning Dew into play, and it's not something they would do really before 72. So I just kind of eliminated any years before that. And so I settled on the earliest year because that's what it sounded like.
Great. Edward, what were you thinking with 72?
I actually didn't even think 72 at first. Like at first, just the way Keith was playing piano, it sounded very like 77 to me. It was very pretty sounding. And like, I'm thinking, okay, post hiatus with Keith, that's only 76, 77, 78, and they only played it once in 78. So I'm just thinking like, okay, what could it be? And then they go into freaking playing in the band, and I'm like, what the hell? Right? Because like this freaking band, man. But like once it starts playing with once Jerry starts doing the wah filter, I'm like there's no, in the 30 years of the band, there's nothing like that 72 wah filter that he'd do. Like during like, from things like the other one to this playing in the band to freaking like Sugar Magnolia, he'd do it on. Like it was just phenomenal sounding. That's unique to really just that year.
You play the trombone, right?
That's correct.
Are there any filters for the trombone? Or is trombone just play it into the mic and that's it?
No, there are. They're just like really, it's pretty much like you're using MIDI, right? Like you just play into a microphone and that like it'll process it and make it sound different to you. Like I'm trying to think of some guys that really like do it weird. Like there's the guy that plays Bone for the Wolf Bros right now. His name is Adam Thies. He's really into like that psychedelic trombone stuff, and it's really cool. But it's also like expensive, and I'm a college student, so I don't get to experiment with it, But I mean, apart from that, you got, the old sticking a mute in it, right? Or doing the toilet plunger.
Right
and
on.
people will ask, like, when you're using a plunger, is it an actual toilet plunger? And yes, I went to Home Depot, spent $8 on a really big toilet plunger, and I used that when I saw.
What if someone with unlimited means wanted to produce the plunger effect? They still will go to Home Depot?
No, there's like professional ones that make it sound like a more refined, but like when you're 19 and work in a movie theater, you don't have very many options,
So you keep that plunger separate than the regular plunger? How do you keep them two different places?
Well, that one's easy. I don't do much practicing in the restroom, so I usually keep it with I keep it in a bag separate with all my band stuff.
Yeah, gotta have a system for that. Can't have any mix-ups.
Totally.
No room margin for error there. Yeah.
Not at all.
Great. Gavin, 72 as well.
Yeah, I can't add much to what everyone else said. I just remember a few months ago, David Lemieux did some like St. Louis special on the channel, and I remember driving and hearing this. I love Morning Dew, but I just remember the transition into playing. And so when the music started, I was like, this sounds familiar. But once it went into playing, I was pretty sure that was the one. But, I'm sure they did, transitions out of Morning Dew into something else a bunch of times. I just narrowed in on that.
Great. And in Gunnar, 73.
Well, it was certainly between 72 and 73 for me. One of the things that kind of swayed my decision picking 73 was I was thinking about a Cow Palace show from 74 where I think they did the same sort of transition in a big long second set of sandwiches. So that's kind of what led me into the 73 mode.
That makes a lot of sense. Great. Well, Gavin has 1, Edward has 1, Gunnar has 3, Brett has 1. Let's hear the 4th of 5 picks. Still a dead heat. That was a jam at Onondaga County War Memorial in Syracuse, New York on September 28th, 1976. That was an unknown audience tape transferred by Dale Shepard.
It's also a Dick's Picks, by the way.
So you couldn't play the Dick's Picks, huh?
Shit, it was the only one I could find on archive.
Look at those Dick's Picks. I guess I made a mistake there.
No, that's my fault. Sometimes the Dick's Picks are the only ones that on archive that's not true, actually. There are many of them on archive. I just looked at the first 4, and then none of them were Dick's Picks. I'm like, all right. Well, that's not exactly John's vision. Apologies. But John, why'd you choose that 76?
I thought it's really a beautiful piece. It doesn't sound like 76 to me. It's one of the reasons I picked it. It goes into a great Comes a Time, but that's all. It comes out of Samson. They do this beautiful jam and go into Comes a Time. And it's unlike a lot of things in 76, I thought.
How do you characterize 76?
I like it. I like 76. It's transition year. You get a little bit of that jazzy stuff sometimes. You get a little bit of the more structured 77 stuff sometimes.
Yeah, no, totally. The big thing on the show is we try to decipher 76. It's really enigmatic. So I look at every morsel I can gather about it. Gavin got it exactly, 76. Gavin, what were you hearing? Hell of a pull.
Thank you. The 76, like the piano was a lot heavier in the mix. And even though this was an audience, it didn't sound 77. Definitely didn't sound 78 because it was a little more polished in 78. And it just sounded like other, similar jams of songs. The way that the keyboard, especially the Keith's keyboard, was presented in the mix, immediately led me to 76.
Hell of a pull. Next closest was Brett at 74. Brett, why 74?
It sounded a lot like sort of that tight jamming that you would see, sort of that tight jazzy kind of jamming that you'd get in 74. I guess perhaps, you could listen for 1 or 2 drummers kind of dynamic, but I'm not sure how much you could hear. I was kind of listening, but recording quality wasn't wonderful. Not that it wasn't a great audience, but it's an audience recording. Audience is an audience. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And Edward 73.
Like you said, man, 76 is just enigmatic. Like everything sounded so different from month to month that year. Like you got like the June shows where it's like some of the most beautiful stuff you'll ever hear. Then once it starts like getting past that, it's all just like controlled, beautiful chaos. And just I was thinking 73 just because I was actually thinking between 71 and 73. Just something about Keith's piano. It sounded not quite grand piano that he would get to play, but sort of upright. But just the runs that Jerry was doing on the guitar, it sounded too developed to be 71. And I just thought, no, it's got to be 73 then.
Jerry's runs, love it. Gunnar guessed 84. Tell us, Gunnar.
Well, I fell asleep at the keyboard department. But what I was really hearing there was I was hearing a recording that sounded like it was in a shed. And that's really what swayed me. It sounded like shows I was seeing in 84. I was absolutely hearing two drummers, and I was kind of listening to the quality of what they were doing together. And I was listening for Bobby's guitar because that sounded like it could have been in that vicinity, as well as the way Phil's bass sounded. And I was just hearing the echoing of a like Saratoga or Merriweather, you know. I choked.
No. See, you have the good fortune and the misfortune to have been at these shows. So you probably heard something like you said, like, oh, you got to be there, but then you have this like confirmation bias. Like, I know that reverberation. I wish I had that problem. Going into the last round, before we go to the fifth song, John, we ask everyone how they got into the Dead. I already got these guys' origin stories. How did you get into the band, though?
Well, the first time I got into the band was Working Man's Dead. I listened to Working Man's Dead. It turned me right there. I was an Allman Brothers fan, and I got a hold of Working Man's Dead. I think it was still in high school, and that was the first thing that turned me on to the Dead. And then I saw them, in '73 at that December show, and from then on, I was converted completely. I was a diehard fan after seeing them live. So,
did you seek out American Beauty right afterwards, or did you just kind of settle in on Working Man's
oh
Dead?
no, I started to seek out all the albums, in that day, and then I remember, it took a while before I got into the live recordings. Like tapes weren't so easy to come by back then. I wasn't in the taping circle for a while, so we would wait with a certain amount of anxiety for new releases to come out. And I remember listening to things like, I really thought at the time, I thought Steal Your Face was great. That's how bad it was, because I didn't have any live Dead except for, I said, oh, this is great. Of course, I was listening to it with a friend who happened to have a sheet of Halsey, so it kind of made it better. But yeah, that's how I got in.
Oh, I see the full picture now.
I have very fond memories of listening to Steal Your Face on the way to my very first Dead show in Saratoga in '83.
Yeah.
And for that reason, Steal Your Face still is something that I think is okay.
It was exciting. I remember when we first got, I said, all right, listen to this. Yeah.
Awesome. Gavin has a 2-point advantage over Brett, who's his next closest. So if Gavin can nail us one or be a couple points off, he goes on to the finals. That was a caution jam at the Boston Garden on May 12th, 1980. John, fun pick.
Thanks. It was one of the last caution jams that they did. I believe they did one in '81 after that. Some people would argue that's not a caution jam, but I'm pretty sure it is. It came out of Heath John, goes into drums. Like you said, pretty speedy. It's I thought it was kind of an interesting sound for 1980.
So the only one who got it exactly was Gunnar, 1980. Really nice poll, Gunnar. How'd you figure that out?
It was hard. I got lucky, I guess. But I really was listening to the keyboards and the speedy drums. Well, the thing about the Caution Jam, that was something, because it never appeared later in the 80s, like John said. So that was a factor. I was kind of leaning towards 79, actually. But yeah, the good old Boston Garden. I had plenty of good night in that place watching the Dead.
Yeah.
You know, one of the great things about the Boston Garden was when the band was rolling in that room, you could see the balcony just swaying up and
Yep.
down. It
Yep.
was something.
Absolutely.
Were people
It's like a
spooked by that
wave.
at all?
It was freaky because it's
Yeah.
such an old building. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
But no one did anything about it. It was like, well, take our chances.
You just ride the wave, really. You know?
The literal wave. Good pull, Gunnar. Really nice. Next closest was everyone else. Everyone else got 79, which means Gavin wins and continues on to the tournament champion
Congrats.
final. Way to go, Gavin. Yeah, why 79? What were you considering? What range were you considering there?
I wasn't. When I lost, it was on Caution, and I was so pissed. You know, and I in my diatribe after losing, I said that the only Cautions I remember really were the Caution Jams in '79, and so I was like, oh, Caution Jam, perfect, 79. I didn't even know they played it in '80, but I was like, I'm not going to be that far off if it's not 79.
Great. Wow. Full circle. Love it.
Full circle.
Well, congrats. And
Thank
for
you.
your success, you get to go up against Steve and someone else who's TBD. It'll be a great final. Brett, you also guessed 79.
Plinky Keys. Next. that was what I was thinking. And also the intensity. I know early Brent was like just off the wall. I was thinking 82 because I thought they had a better like camaraderie, like jam wise, than they did when they first started out in 79. But maybe I was thinking late 79 when they got really going. They played some real barn burner of shows there and during that time. So yeah, between 2 years. Congratulations, Gavin.
Thank you.
And Edward, 79 as well. Anything you want to add to the breakdown?
Just that again, I went with my gut, and my gut was wrong. It just felt very like just cocaine, you know. And I know that they were super into it in 79 and 80, especially. But I had remembered that, like, I think it was on some website. I think it was like herpybot.com that Caution Jams only go as far as 79 on that website. I'm like, oh, well, that's the latest one. Fingers crossed. But I'm like, man, it does sound like 1980 though. And well, it sure did.
They didn't always list them as Caution Jams. Sometimes it would just be part of, you know, whatever song they were playing for that.
Mhm.
So there's definitely, I totally understand what you're saying there.
Great job, everyone. John, thank you so much for the picks. The Deadpod is available via link in the show notes. I'm sure everyone already listens. I feel silly saying that, but if you don't, it's in the link in the show notes. Yeah, John, it was so cool getting to meet you and hear your picks. Thanks for coming on.
It's nice meeting all of you. And good luck, Gavin, in the
Thank you.
showdown.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks again to the professor. The Deadpod link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. For all the show links for Guest of the Year, including our YouTube channel, go to guestoftheyear.net. And if you want to be a contestant for Season 3, sponsor the show, or make comments and ask questions, email us, info@guestoftheyear.net. Shout out to Dylan for drawing the poster, and James and Jack for helping out behind the scenes. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to the amazing tapers whose recordings made this show possible. Congratulations to Gavin for moving on to the finals. And to other contestants, thanks for playing. And remember, it's all one song anyway.
And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night.